When I met Jenna, she was electric. She didn't just walk into a room, she commanded it. Her laugh could make strangers stop mid-conversation, and her sharp wit could leave anyone scrambling to keep up. She wasn't just beautiful. She was magnetic, the kind of person who drew everyone in without even trying. I wasn't immune to it. If anything, I was her biggest fan, captivated by the energy she brought into my life. When we got married, I thought I'd finally found my forever. I envisioned us as this unstoppable duo. Me, the steady anchor, and her, the whirlwind of excitement. It worked for a while, too. Our differences complemented each other, balancing out our individual flaws. But somewhere along the way, that balance shifted. At first, I didn't notice the cracks. They were subtle, easy to dismiss. Jenna had always been flirtatious, but it felt harmless. Something that came with her charm, part of the package that made her who she was. She could light up a conversation with anyone, and I'd always loved that about her. But over time, the harmless became harder to ignore. It started small. A lingering glance at a waiter during dinner. A laugh that felt a little too enthusiastic at someone else's joke. Little things that, on their own, wouldn't mean much, but together started forming a pattern I couldn't unsee. I remember the first time I said something about it. We were at a party, and I caught her in the middle of what looked like a private moment with some guy I didn't know. They weren't touching, but the way they were talking, the way she tilted her head and leaned in, it made my stomach twist. "Jenna," I said later that night when we were alone. "What was that back there?" She looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "What was what?" "You and that guy. You were... I don't know. You looked close." She rolled her eyes, her tone dismissive. "Oh, please. Don't be ridiculous. He's just a friend." Just a friend. That became her go-to defense every time I brought it up. Every time her behavior made me feel like I was competing for her attention, she'd wave it away with a laugh, accusing me of being jealous or insecure. And every time, I'd back down, convinced I was overreacting. But the feelings didn't go away. They lingered, gnawing at me in quiet moments, growing louder with every subtle flirtation, every brush-off, every time I felt like I wasn't enough for her. The worst part wasn't the flirting itself. It was the way Jenna handled it. Like it was my problem, not hers. She'd laugh off my concerns, turning them into jokes at my expense. "Oh, Ethan, you're so sensitive," she'd say, shaking her head. "It's cute, really." Cute. That word felt like a slap in the face. My discomfort wasn't cute. It was real, and it was eating away at the foundation of our marriage. But no matter how many times I tried to explain that to her, she never seemed to take it seriously. Over time, I started to wonder if I was the one who was wrong. Maybe I was being too sensitive, too insecure. Maybe Jenna was right, and this was just who she was. A social butterfly who thrived on connection. But even if that were true, where did that leave me? I didn't want to be the kind of husband who policed his wife's behavior or told her who she could and couldn't talk to. That wasn't the kind of relationship I wanted. But I also didn't want to feel like an afterthought in my own marriage. Like I was constantly fighting for scraps of her attention while she gave her best self to everyone else. The turning point came about a year into these feelings. We were at another party. One of those glitzy, over-the-top events Jenna loved so much. She was in her element, mingling effortlessly while I hung back, nursing a drink and trying to blend into the background. That's when I saw it. Her standing across the room, laughing at something another man said. I didn't recognize him, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the way she looked at him, like he was the most interesting person in the world, like she was giving him a part of herself I hadn't seen in years. I felt something inside me snap. Not anger, exactly. More like resignation. This wasn't a one-time thing, and it wasn't going to change. Jenna loved the attention, the validation, the thrill of being wanted. And no matter how much I loved her, I couldn't compete with that. Later that night, when we were driving home, I tried one last time to reach her. "Jenna," I said, my voice steady but heavy. "Do you even see what you're doing to us?" She glanced at me, confused. "What are you talking about? You think I don't notice the way you act around other men?" I continued. "The way you light up for them, like I'm not even there?" For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, with a smirk, she said, "Oh, Ethan, you're imagining things, imagining things." That was the moment I knew. Jenna wasn't going to change because she didn't think she needed to. To her, this was all in my head, a problem for me to fix, not her. I didn't say anything else that night. There was nothing left to say. But deep down, I knew our marriage was hanging by a thread, and that I wasn't the one holding the scissors. I should have known the night was going to be a disaster from the moment we arrived. The venue was one of those upscale hotels with chandeliers that looked like they'd cost more than my entire year's salary when I was starting out. Jenna, of course, looked stunning. She had on this emerald green dress that clung to her like it was made just for her, and her hair was styled in that effortless way that took hours to perfect. She was radiant, and she knew it. I, on the other hand, felt like an accessory, a prop meant to complete the picture of her perfect life. As we stepped into the room, she beamed at the crowd, her eyes scanning the faces like she was scouting her next audience. I stayed close at first, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with people I barely knew, but Jenna had already drifted into her element. That's how these events usually went. Jenna would mingle, and I'd stay back, trying to make small talk with someone equally disinterested. But tonight felt different. There was a tension in the air, subtle but undeniable, and it didn't take long to figure out why. It was him. He wasn't anyone I recognized, but it didn't matter. He was tall, well-dressed, and had that self-assured air of someone who had never heard the word no. I saw him standing near the bar, casually leaning against the counter with a drink in his hand, scanning the room like he was sizing up his options. And then his eyes landed on Jenna. She noticed him almost immediately, her lips curling into a faint smile as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I don't know if she even realized she did it. It was one of her tells, a subtle move that screamed, "Notice me." And notice her, he did. I tried to ignore it at first. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was overreacting. But as the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching something unfold in real time, like an inevitability I was powerless to stop. I stood by one of the high tables, sipping my drink and keeping an eye on Jenna as she worked the room. She was in her element, laughing and gesturing animatedly. But every so often, her gaze would drift back to the man at the bar. He wasn't just watching her. He was studying her, like she was a puzzle he couldn't wait to solve. When he finally made his move, it felt like slow motion. I watched as he approached her, his confident stride cutting through the crowd. Jenna turned to him, her face lighting up in a way that made my stomach twist. They exchanged a few words, and then she laughed. A laugh I hadn't heard in months, one that was full and genuine and all for him. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my composure. It wasn't like she was doing anything overtly wrong. They weren't touching, and from a distance it could have been mistaken for polite conversation. But I knew Jenna too well. I knew the tilt of her head, the way her eyes sparkled when she felt truly seen. And right now, she was giving him a version of herself I hadn't seen in a long time. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked over, forcing myself to keep my steps even and my expression calm. Jenna saw me approaching and smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ethan, there you are," she said, her tone bright and cheerful, like nothing was wrong. "This is Lucas. He works in PR." Lucas turned to me, extending a hand. "Ethan," he said smoothly, "you've got quite the wife here. She's been telling me all about your business ventures. Impressive stuff." I shook his hand, though the grip felt hollow. "Thanks," I said flatly. The three of us stood there for a moment, an awkward triangle of tension, before Jenna broke the silence. Lucas was just saying he's got some great ideas for expanding your client base, she said, her voice laced with enthusiasm. You two should talk. I forced a smile. Maybe later. I was actually hoping to steal you away for a bit, Jenna. We haven't had a chance to catch up all night. Her smile faltered just for a second, but she recovered quickly. Of course, she said, brushing her hand against my arm. Excuse us, Lucas. As we walked away, I leaned in close, keeping my voice low. You think I don't see you eyeing him from across the room? She stopped in her tracks, turning to face me with a smirk that made my blood boil. Then watch closely, she said, her voice calm but dripping with defiance. Because I'm about to give him a show. For a moment, I just stared at her, stunned. I'd expected her to deny it, to brush it off like she always did. But this was new. This was a boldness I didn't know she had, and it felt like a slap in the face. I leaned in, my voice cold and steady. And I'm about to give you a reality check. I'm gone before the music stops. Her smirk faltered, just slightly, but she quickly recovered. Oh, please, she said with a laugh, brushing me off like she always did. You're not going anywhere. But this time, she was wrong. For the rest of the night, I stayed back, watching as Jenna floated through the room like nothing had happened. She was radiant, charming, magnetic as always. But to me, she looked like a stranger, someone I no longer recognized, no longer wanted to fight for. By the time the night ended, I'd already made up my mind. The reality check wasn't for Jenna, it was for me. I couldn't keep pretending that this was something we could fix. I couldn't keep pretending that Jenna was someone she wasn't. As we left the party, walking to the car in silence, I felt a strange sense of calm. I knew what I had to do, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to do it. By the time we got home from the party, the silence between us was deafening. Jenna had spent the entire car ride scrolling through her phone, pretending like nothing had happened, like we hadn't exchanged the kind of words that left permanent cracks in a marriage. I drove in silence, my knuckles tight around the wheel, my mind racing with everything I'd been holding back for far too long. When we walked into the house, she kicked off her heels and went straight for the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine like it was any other night. I watched her from the doorway, half expecting her to say something, to acknowledge the conversation we'd had at the party. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned against the counter, swirling her glass and scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. I stood there for a moment, feeling a wave of disbelief. Was this really it? Was this how little she cared about us? About me? Part of me wanted to yell, to demand an explanation, to force her to admit what she'd been doing. But another part of me, the part that was exhausted from years of trying to hold us together, just wanted to walk away. You really don't care, do you? I finally said, my voice calm but heavy. She glanced up at me, her expression unreadable. Care about what? She asked, her tone bored. About us. About what you've done to this marriage. About how you've treated me. Jenna sighed, setting her glass down on the counter. Ethan, you're being dramatic again. Nothing happened. I talked to a guy at a party. Big deal. It's not just about the party, Jenna, I said, stepping into the kitchen. It's about everything. The flirting, the dismissiveness, the way you make me feel like I'm the last thing on your mind when I'm supposed to be your husband. She rolled her eyes. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Why can't you just let it go? Because I'm done letting it go, I snapped, my voice rising for the first time that night. I've let it go 100 times, Jenna. I've ignored the way you act around other men. I've swallowed my pride every time you made me feel small. I've tried to be patient, to talk to you, to make this work, but you don't care. You've never cared. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of defensiveness. "That's not fair," she said, crossing her arms. "I've done plenty for this marriage." "Like what?" I asked, my voice quieter but no less intense. "What have you done, Jenna? Because from where I'm standing, all you've done is take. My time, my energy, my love, and you've given nothing in return." She opened her mouth to respond but closed it again, her expression hardening. "You know what, Ethan? Maybe this marriage was a mistake. Maybe we're just not right for each other." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but instead of breaking me, they solidified something inside me. She wasn't going to change. She wasn't going to fight for us, and I was done fighting for someone who couldn't even admit there was a problem. "Maybe you're right," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Maybe this was a mistake. But I'll tell you one thing. It's a mistake I'm not going to keep making." I turned and walked toward the bedroom, leaving Jenna standing in the kitchen. My hands were shaking as I grabbed a bag from the closet and started packing. I didn't take much, just the essentials. Clothes, toiletries, a few personal items. The rest could stay. None of it mattered anymore. Jenna appeared in the doorway, her arms still crossed. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I'm leaving," I said simply, not bothering to look at her. "I told you at the party, Jenna, I'm done. You can give your show to whoever you want, but I won't be here to see it." She laughed, but it was hollow. "You're not serious." I zipped up the bag and slung it over my shoulder, turning to face her. I've never been more serious in my life. For a moment, she just stared at me, like she couldn't quite believe what was happening. Then her expression shifted to something resembling panic. "Ethan, come on, you're overreacting. This is ridiculous." "No," I said, walking past her toward the door. "What's ridiculous is how long I stayed, thinking things would change. But they won't. You won't." I didn't wait for her to respond. I walked out the door, letting it close behind me with a finality that felt like a weight lifting off my chest. As I got into my car and drove away, I didn't feel anger or sadness, just a strange, bittersweet sense of relief. I was done being her audience, her safety net, her afterthought. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. When I left that night, I made a decision. No more explanations, no more arguments, and no more trying to make her see what she didn't want to. Jenna had always been a master at twisting conversations, turning my valid concerns into accusations of insecurity or overreaction. But not this time. This time, I wasn't giving her the chance. The text started almost immediately. The first one came in just as I pulled into the parking lot of the hotel where I'd booked a room. "Ethan, seriously? Where are you? Come home so we can talk." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say, and honestly, I didn't trust myself to say it calmly if I did. I turned off my phone and tossed it onto the hotel room desk, collapsing onto the bed with a mix of exhaustion and relief. The next morning, when I turned my phone back on, it buzzed nonstop with messages. They ranged from annoyed to pleading to outright angry. "You're acting like a child. I didn't do anything wrong and you're making this into a huge deal. Ethan, stop ignoring me. We need to talk about this." Still, I didn't respond. Every word she sent only solidified my decision to leave. She wasn't apologizing or even acknowledging her actions, just trying to regain control of a situation she thought she could manipulate, like always. By the third day, the tone of her messages shifted. The defiance and annoyance gave way to something closer to desperation. "Ethan, I'm sorry, okay? Can we please just talk? I promise I'll listen this time." That word, listen, might have meant something a few months ago. But now, it felt hollow. Jenna had plenty of opportunities to listen before. She'd had chances to see how her actions affected me, to take responsibility, to show me that our marriage mattered to her. But she hadn't. And now it was too late. As the days passed, the messages became less frequent but more emotional. "I miss you. Please don't do this. We can fix this. I know we can." I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I might. Her words didn't sting the way they once would have, but they didn't bring closure either. If anything, they just made me sad. Not for me, but for what we'd lost. For what we could have been if she'd cared enough to try before it all fell apart. I started to hear about Jenna's reaction through mutual friends. One of them, Tom, called me out of the blue. "Ethan, man," he said, his tone cautious. "I ran into Jenna the other day. She told me what happened." "Did she?" I replied, my voice flat. "Yeah, she's not handling it great. She said she doesn't understand why you left, that it came out of nowhere." I laughed bitterly at that. Out of nowhere? Really? "She's spinning it like you just walked out without warning," Tom admitted. But I told her, "Look, Ethan's been dealing with this for a long time." She didn't want to hear it, though. "Of course she didn't," I said, shaking my head. "Jenna's good at ignoring the parts of reality she doesn't like." Tom hesitated. "I'm not saying you should go back or anything, but maybe you should at least talk to her. Give her some closure." "Closure?" I repeated, incredulous. "Tom, I spent years trying to talk to her, trying to fix things, trying to get her to take any of this seriously. She didn't care then, so why should I believe she cares now?" Tom didn't have an answer for that, and neither did I. Over the next few weeks, the texts slowed to a trickle. Every once in a while, I'd get one late at night, messages that felt raw, unfiltered, and drenched in regret. "I don't know how we got here. I miss us. I'm sorry." But by then, it was too little, too late. Her apologies felt like they were for her own sake, not mine. Like she wanted to absolve herself of guilt more than she wanted to make things right. I didn't block her number. I didn't have to. Ignoring her messages wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting myself. Every time she reached out, it felt like she was pulling at a thread I'd finally managed to cut. I wasn't going to let her unravel me again. One night, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, looking out over the city. My phone buzzed beside me, and for a moment, I considered picking it up. But when I saw her name on the screen, I just sighed and let it go to voicemail. I didn't need to hear her voice to know what she'd say. The same excuses, the same promises, the same empty words that had kept me hanging on for far too long. But I wasn't that person anymore. I'd learned to stop waiting for Jenna to change. Now it was time to focus on changing myself. The weeks after I left were a strange mix of freedom and uncertainty. On one hand, I felt like a weight had been lifted. I no longer had to endure Jenna's dismissive attitude or the constant ache of feeling second best. On the other hand, I was stepping into a void. For so long, my life had revolved around our marriage, trying to fix it, trying to make it work. Now, for the first time, I had to figure out what life looked like without her. I moved into a small apartment downtown. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom with basic furniture and a view of the parking lot, but it felt like mine. No shared closets, no reminders of Jenna in every corner, no tension lingering in the air. Just a clean slate. I unpacked my things slowly, deliberately, finding a strange sense of satisfaction in the simplicity of it all. Work became my sanctuary. I poured myself into my projects, staying late at the office, taking on tasks I'd avoided for months. It wasn't about avoiding the pain, though I won't lie. That was part of it. It was about regaining control, proving to myself that I was capable of thriving on my own. My colleagues noticed the change. "You seem different," one of them said during a lunch break. "More focused." I just nodded. "I guess I've got fewer distractions now." Outside of work, I started reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in ages. Jenna's social whirlwind had always taken precedence, and somewhere along the way, I'd let my own relationships fade into the background. Now, I reached out to those old friends, meeting them for coffee or a beer, rediscovering the people who had always been there, even when I hadn't made time for them. One of those friends, Mark, convinced me to join him for a weekend hike. "You need to get out of the city," he said. "Clear your head." Trust me, it'll help. I wasn't sure about it. Nature had never been my thing, but I agreed. And he was right. Standing on the edge of a cliff, looking out over miles of untouched wilderness, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The noise in my head quieted, replaced by the sound of the wind and the rustling trees. It was a reminder that the world was so much bigger than my problems, that life went on regardless of the messes we made. That hike was a turning point. I started making time for myself in ways I hadn't before. I took up running, finding solace in the rhythm of my footsteps and the steady burn in my muscles. I signed up for a cooking class, learning how to make meals that didn't come from a takeout menu. I even started reading again, losing myself in books that had nothing to do with work or self-help, just stories that reminded me of the joy in escape. While I was finding my footing, Jenna's life seemed to be unraveling. I didn't go looking for updates, but they found me anyway, carried by the whispers of mutual friends and the occasional social media posts that crossed my path. "She's not doing great," Tom mentioned one day over coffee. "She was at a party last weekend and it wasn't pretty. You know how she used to light up a room? It's not like that anymore." I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt vindicated. Jenna was finally facing the consequences of her actions. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I fell in love with, felt a pang of sadness. Not pity, exactly, but something close to it. The stories kept coming. Jenna had thrown herself into the social scene even harder than before, but it wasn't working. The charm that had once captivated everyone around her seemed to be wearing thin. Friends who used to hang on her every word were growing tired of the drama, the constant need for attention. And without me there to pick up the pieces or provide the stability she'd taken for granted, her life was slipping out of her control. Then there were the texts. They came less frequently now, but when they did, they were more raw, more desperate. "I don't know how to do this without you. Everything feels wrong. I miss us. Please, Ethan, just talk to me." I never responded. Not because I didn't care. I'd cared for so long it nearly broke me. But because I knew that talking to her wouldn't help either of us. Jenna needed to face her reality, just like I'd faced mine. She needed to understand that some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. One day, I got a call from one of her closer friends. "Ethan, I hate to bother you, but I think you should know. Jenna's really struggling. She's not herself. Maybe she just needs to hear from you." "I appreciate you telling me," I said, keeping my tone measured. "But I don't think reaching out will fix anything. She has to figure this out on her own." The friend sighed, clearly disappointed but not surprised. "I get it. I just thought you should know." The truth is, hearing about Jenna's struggles didn't bring me any joy. It didn't bring me closure either. It just reminded me of how far we'd drifted, how much we'd both lost in the process. But it also reinforced something I'd been learning since the day I walked out. I couldn't save her. I couldn't fix her. All I could do was take care of myself and hope that one day she'd find a way to do the same. As I sat in my apartment that night, staring out at the city lights, I realized something. Jenna's spiral wasn't my burden anymore. It wasn't my responsibility to catch her when she fell. My responsibility was to myself, to the life I was rebuilding, to the person I was becoming. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.
Ethan was the kind of man people instinctively respected. He carried himself with quiet confidence, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the chaos that life often threw his way. As a business strategist, he had a knack for analyzing situations, weighing every variable and predicting outcomes. His success stemmed not from aggression but from patience and calculated moves. At home, he prided himself on being a devoted husband, valuing integrity and respect above all else. To him, marriage was a partnership built on trust, and for years, he believed his relationship with Lila embodied those values. Lila, his wife of 7 years, was a stark contrast to Ethan. Charismatic and spontaneous, she had an energy that could light up a room. People were drawn to her effortlessly, captivated by her wit and charm. However, underneath her magnetic personality lay a restlessness she couldn't quite quell. Lila loved excitement, and as the years passed, the stability Ethan provided began to feel stifling. She craved something more, a spark, a thrill, and when she met Jordan, she found herself dangerously tempted. Jordan was everything Ethan was not. Loud, brash, and unapologetically arrogant, he prided himself on his self-proclaimed status as an alpha male. He thrived on power, not just in his career but in his relationships. Jordan saw people as pawns to manipulate, their loyalty and affection tools for his own gratification. When he met Lila, he saw an opportunity, not just to indulge in an affair, but to prove his dominance over another man. Naomi, Lila's best friend, had always been a supportive presence in her life. She admired Lila's confidence and independence, but even Naomi couldn't ignore the cracks in her friend's marriage. She had noticed Lila's growing distance from Ethan and her fascination with Jordan. While Naomi wanted to remain loyal to Lila, she found herself increasingly uncomfortable with her friend's choices. Deep down, she respected Ethan and struggled with the moral conflict of watching Lila's betrayal unfold. Daniel, Ethan's childhood friend, was the first person Ethan turned to when things began to feel off. Daniel was fiercely loyal and pragmatic, offering not just emotional support but practical advice. With a sharp eye for detail and a knack for uncovering the truth, Daniel became Ethan's ally in piecing together what was happening behind the scenes. Sophia, Jordan's ex-girlfriend, was a wild card in the story. Once deeply enamored with Jordan, she had suffered under his controlling and manipulative behavior. Their relationship had left her scarred, but it also gave her insight into Jordan's true nature. When approached by Ethan, she saw an opportunity to not only warn him, but to exact her own form of justice. Ethan's first clue that something was amiss came in the form of subtle changes in Lila's behavior. She had always been open and affectionate, quick to share details about her day or leave her phone lying around the house. But recently, she had grown more secretive. Her phone, once an afterthought, was now always in her hand or pocket, its screen conveniently facing down whenever she set it on a table. When Ethan asked her about it, she brushed him off with a laugh, saying, "Work's just been hectic. Nothing to worry about." Then there were the late nights. Lila had always been social, but now she seemed to have endless commitments, work events, dinners with friends, or last-minute errands that kept her out well past the time she'd normally be home. Ethan didn't want to be the paranoid husband, so he tried to ignore the unease growing in his chest. But the emotional distance between them was undeniable. Conversations became surface level, affection felt forced, and the once effortless connection they shared was slipping away. The tipping point came one evening when Ethan found himself alone in the living room, flipping through a magazine while Lila was in the shower. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, the screen lighting up with a message. Ethan glanced at it, intending to ignore it, but the name caught his eye, Jordan. The preview of the message read, "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was unforgettable." Ethan's stomach dropped. He picked up the phone, hesitating for a moment before unlocking it with the passcode he knew she hadn't bothered to change. What he found confirmed his worst fears. There were dozens of messages between Lila and Jordan, each one more damning than the last. Flirtatious texts, plans for secret meetings, and even photos. All evidence of an affair that had been going on for months. Ethan's first instinct was rage, but he quickly suppressed it. Confronting her then and there would be satisfying in the moment, but it wouldn't give him what he truly wanted, justice. Instead, he carefully documented everything, forwarding key messages and screenshots to his own email. He needed proof, not just for himself but for what he knew was coming. That night, he lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling as his mind raced. He could feel the weight of the betrayal pressing down on him, but beneath the hurt, a plan began to take shape. Lila's affair wasn't just about infidelity. It was about disrespect, and Ethan was determined to show her, and Jordan, that they had underestimated him. The next morning, Ethan called Daniel. "I need your help," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "Something's going on with Lila, and I need to know everything about the man she's seeing. Daniel didn't ask questions. Say no more, he replied. I'll look into it. You focus on keeping things steady at home. Ethan hung up the phone, his resolve hardening. He wouldn't act on impulse or let his emotions cloud his judgment. This wasn't just about ending the affair. It was about reclaiming his dignity and teaching them both a lesson they'd never forget. The storm was coming, and Ethan was ready to face it head-on. The day Jordan showed up at my office uninvited was the day I realized just how far his arrogance went. It wasn't enough for him to steal another man's wife. He needed to assert his dominance, to play the role of the alpha male he imagined himself to be. But what he didn't know, what he could never understand, was that I had been preparing for this moment. He thought I'd fold, that I'd cower in the face of his bravado. He had no idea what kind of man he was dealing with. It started with my assistant's hesitant knock on my office door. Mr. Carter, she said, peeking her head in, her voice uncertain. There's someone here to see you. He said it's urgent. I frowned. My schedule was packed that day, and I didn't have time for unexpected guests. Who is it? He wouldn't give his name, she replied, looking uncomfortable, but he insisted it was a man-to-man matter. Should I call security? Her words sent a chill of anticipation down my spine. I didn't need a name to know who it was. No, I said calmly. Send him in. Jordan walked in moments later, oozing confidence. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with an air of self-importance that seemed to fill the room. His tailored suit, expensive watch, and smug smirk were all designed to intimidate. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, studying him like he was an uninvited guest at a party I was hosting. Ethan, he began, his tone dripping with condescension. We need to talk. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. By all means. He didn't sit. Instead, he planted his hands on the desk, leaning forward as if to assert his dominance. I'll get straight to the point, he said. We both know why I'm here. Lila deserves better than what you've been giving her. She's wasted too many years of her life with you, and she's finally realized it. I didn't respond, letting him continue. The silence clearly unnerved him, but he pressed on, his voice growing louder. She's in love with me. She wants to be with me. And honestly, Ethan, the best thing you can do is step aside and let her pursue her happiness. Do the decent thing for once in your life. I raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Yes, he said, clearly mistaking my calmness for submission. I'll make this simple for you. You have two options. Option 1, you leave quietly. No drama, no fuss. Just walk away and let Lila be with the man she truly wants. Option 2, he smirked, his eyes narrowing. You face me like a man. There it was, the challenge he thought would break me. I could feel the tension crackling in the air, the weight of his expectation that I'd either back down or lash out. But instead of anger, I felt an almost serene clarity. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a performance, and I was about to steal the spotlight. I leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with him. My voice was calm, deliberate. Two options, huh? How generous of you. Jordan's smirk widened, thinking he'd gotten under my skin. I'm nothing if not fair. Well, I've got a third option for you, I said, my tone cool as ice. Do you want your teeth whole or in pieces before I clear the table with your face? The smirk vanished. For a moment, he just stared at me, his confidence faltering as the reality of the situation began to sink in. He had walked in here expecting a weak, defeated man. Instead, he found someone who wasn't afraid of him, someone who had already mapped out every possible outcome of this encounter. Is that supposed to scare me? He said, though his voice lacked the same bravado as before. No, I replied, standing slowly and stepping around the desk. It's not supposed to scare you. It's supposed to make you think. Because right now, you're standing in my office, in my world, and you seem to think you have the upper hand. But let me remind you, Jordan, that arrogance has a funny way of backfiring. I walked toward him, closing the distance until we were just inches apart. You think you've won because you've charmed my wife with your cheap words and flashy promises. But you don't know me. You don't know what I'm capable of. And you clearly don't know how badly you've underestimated me. Jordan stepped back slightly, his confidence visibly shaken. You're bluffing. Am I? I said, my voice low but steady. Because I've been watching you, Jordan. I know about the lies you've told, the people you've hurt, and the skeletons in your closet. You might think you're the predator here, but let me assure you, you're nothing but prey. The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. Jordan's bravado had crumbled, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. For the first time, he realized he wasn't in control. He wasn't the alpha he imagined himself to be. He was just another man who had underestimated the wrong person. I suggest you leave, I said finally, my tone calm but unyielding. While you still have the option to walk out of here on your own 2 feet. Jordan hesitated, his pride warring with his fear. But ultimately, he turned and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused and looked back at me, his voice laced with bitterness. This isn't over. Oh, I know, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. But next time, you won't be walking out. As the door closed behind him, I felt a sense of satisfaction. This was just the beginning. Jordan had made his move, but he had no idea what was coming. He thought this was a simple game of dominance, but he didn't realize he was already playing by my rules. And when the time came, I would ensure he learned the hard way what it meant to challenge a man like me. After Jordan stormed into my office with his ridiculous demands, I knew it was time to step up my game. He wasn't just a man having an affair with my wife. He was an egotistical manipulator who believed he could walk all over anyone in his path. But Jordan had no idea how much I had already uncovered, or how deep I was willing to dig to bring him down. To dismantle someone like him, I needed to expose not just his affair with Lila, but the very essence of who he was. For that, I needed help, and there was no one better for the job than my best friend, Daniel. Daniel had always been the guy who could smell a lie from a mile away. A skilled investigator with an eye for details most people overlooked, he had helped me uncover the affair in the first place. Now, he was ready to take things further. If we're going to expose him, Daniel said over coffee one morning, we need to hit him where it hurts. Reputation, finances, relationships, everything. People like Jordan thrive on their image, and if you shatter it, they crumble. We started with Jordan's professional life. Daniel pulled records, scoured social media, and even spoke with former colleagues. What we found wasn't surprising, but it was damning. Jordan had a history of shady business practices, cutting corners, taking credit for others' work, and even manipulating subordinates to further his own career. He wasn't just arrogant. He was toxic, and it showed in the number of burned bridges he'd left behind. But the real goldmine came when Daniel tracked down Sophia, one of Jordan's ex-girlfriends. I had heard about her from a passing comment in one of his old social media posts, and Daniel managed to contact her through mutual connections. Sophia was hesitant at first, but once she realized we weren't looking for gossip, but rather the truth, she opened up. Jordan is a master manipulator, she said, her voice laced with bitterness. He knows how to make you feel special, like you're the only person in the world. But it's all an act. Once he has you, he starts tearing you down, subtly at first, then more aggressively. By the time you realize what's happening, he's already made you feel like you can't leave. Sophia's story was heartbreaking. She detailed years of emotional abuse, manipulation, and financial exploitation. Jordan had borrowed money from her under the guise of investments, but never paid her back. He isolated her from friends and family, ensuring she was dependent on him. And when she finally found the strength to leave, he tried to destroy her reputation, spreading lies about her to mutual acquaintances. "Why are you going after him?" she asked, her curiosity evident. "What's your connection?" I hesitated for a moment before replying, "He's involved with my wife." Sophia's eyes widened in understanding. "Then you need to stop him, because if you don't, he'll destroy her, too." Sophia agreed to help, providing records, messages, and even receipts that painted a clear picture of who Jordan really was. Her contribution wasn't just valuable. It was the key to understanding the full scope of Jordan's manipulative tendencies. While Daniel and I worked behind the scenes, another piece of the puzzle was falling into place. Naomi. As Lila's best friend, Naomi had always been a loyal confidant, but even she couldn't ignore the growing cracks in their friendship. Lila had been more distant lately, consumed by her relationship with Jordan, and Naomi was starting to see the darker side of his influence. Naomi and I had always been on good terms. She respected me as Lila's husband, and I admired her sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude. So, when I decided to bring her into the fold, I knew it was a gamble, but one worth taking. If anyone could get through to Lila, or at least provide insight into her state of mind, it was Naomi. One evening, I invited Naomi for coffee under the guise of needing advice. She agreed, curious but cautious. Once we were seated, I didn't waste time. Naomi, I began, I need to be honest with you. I know about Lila and Jordan. Her eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand. Before you say anything, just hear me out. I'm not asking you to betray Lila, but I need you to understand what's really going on. I laid out everything I had discovered, Jordan's manipulation, his history with Sophia, and the evidence I had gathered. Naomi listened silently, her expression shifting from shock to anger to something that looked like shame. When I finished, she sighed heavily and leaned back in her chair. I knew something was off, she admitted. Lila's been different, more secretive, more distant. I tried to talk to her about it, but she brushed me off. And Jordan, there's just something about him I don't trust. Because you're right not to trust him, I said. He's dangerous, Naomi. Not in an obvious way, but in the way he manipulates and destroys people. I'm not just trying to save my marriage, I'm trying to protect Lila from him. Naomi looked conflicted. You know I care about Lila, she said softly. She's my best friend, but I can't ignore what you're telling me. If what you're saying is true, then she's in over her head. She is, I said firmly, and I need your help to make her see that. You know her better than anyone. She'll listen to you in a way she won't listen to me. Naomi nodded slowly, her resolve hardening. Okay, she said. I'll help you. But you need to promise me something, Ethan. Anything. If this goes south, if she refuses to see reason, you need to be prepared to walk away. Don't let this destroy you. I met her gaze, appreciating her honesty. I've already started preparing for that, I admitted. But thank you. With Naomi on my side, the dynamic between her and Lila began to shift. Naomi started planting seeds of doubt in Lila's mind about Jordan, subtly questioning his motives and pointing out inconsistencies in his behavior. At first, Lila brushed it off, defending him fiercely. But as Naomi persisted, the cracks in Jordan's facade began to show. Meanwhile, Daniel and I continued to build our case against Jordan, gathering every piece of evidence we could find. With Sophia's help, we compiled a dossier that painted a damning picture of his manipulative and abusive tendencies. It wasn't just about ending his relationship with Lila. It was about exposing him for who he truly was. As the tension grew, so did the stakes. Lila's infatuation with Jordan made her blind to his flaws, but the pressure from Naomi, coupled with Jordan's own arrogance, was beginning to take its toll. It was only a matter of time before everything came to a head, and when it did, I would be ready. The stage was set, and the players were in position. All that remained was to pull the strings and watch the fallout unfold. The day I handed Lila the divorce papers was one of cold finality. I had rehearsed what I was going to say 100 times in my head, each version more brutal than the last. But when the moment came, I found that silence and precision would deliver the blow far more effectively than anger. It was a quiet evening, the kind that might have once been spent curled up on the couch, reminiscing about the past or dreaming about the future. Now, it was filled with an uneasy tension that had settled into our home like an unwelcome guest. Lila walked in, distracted by her phone, undoubtedly Jordan's influence yet again, and barely acknowledged me. Lila, I said, my tone steady but firm, we need to talk. She froze for a moment, as though some part of her had been expecting this. She turned to face me, masking her unease with an air of nonchalance. What is it now, Ethan? She asked, her voice tinged with impatience. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I placed the envelope on the table between us and slid it toward her. These are for you. What is this? She asked, her brows knitting in confusion as she picked up the envelope. Divorce papers, I said simply. The words hit her like a slap. Her mask of indifference cracked, replaced by a mixture of shock and indignation. What? She stammered, as though she hadn't heard me clearly. You're divorcing me? Yes, I said, my voice cold. For your infidelity. Her face paled, and for a moment, she seemed genuinely at a loss for words. Then the excuses began. Ethan, wait. It's not what you think, Jordan and I. I held up a hand to stop her. Don't. I know everything, Lila. The late nights, the messages, the lies. I've known for months. She swallowed hard, her bravado slipping further. Ethan, please, we can talk about this. We can fix it. I shook my head. There's nothing to fix. You made your choices, and now you'll face the consequences. I have no intention of fighting for this marriage, not after what you've done. But let me make one thing clear. This isn't just about me. Your actions have hurt more than just our relationship. They've hurt you too. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice trembling. You'll see soon enough, I said, turning and walking away. The papers are non-negotiable. Sign them, and let's end this. With the divorce in motion, the next phase of my plan was set to unfold. I arranged a dinner party, inviting Lila, Jordan, Naomi, Daniel, and Sophia. The invitations were carefully worded to ensure Jordan would attend, confident and smug, ready to flaunt his supposed victory. What he didn't know was that this dinner would mark the end of his charade. The evening began in a deceptively calm manner. The table was set, the wine flowed freely, and the conversation was light. Jordan arrived with his usual air of arrogance, his hand resting possessively on Lila's back. He greeted everyone as though he were the host, not a guest, and I let him bask in his delusion. Naomi and Daniel exchanged knowing glances, their roles in the evening carefully rehearsed. Sophia's presence was the first crack in Jordan's confidence. When he saw her seated at the table, his expression faltered for just a moment before he recovered. Sophia, he said, forcing a smile. What a surprise. Jordan, she replied, her tone icy. I wouldn't miss this for the world. As the courses were served, Jordan couldn't resist provoking me. He made thinly veiled jabs about losing what's yours and knowing when to step aside for a real man. His arrogance filled the room like a bad odor, and I could see Lila shifting uncomfortably beside him. She was beginning to realize that Jordan wasn't the man she thought he was. Daniel and Naomi kept the conversation flowing, subtly steering it toward topics that exposed Jordan's flaws. Sophia chimed in at key moments, dropping hints about his manipulative tendencies and past misdeeds. The tension in the room grew thick, and I knew the moment to strike was near. Finally, Jordan couldn't contain himself any longer. He stood up, raising his glass in a mock toast. Let's raise a glass, he said, smirking at me, to new beginnings and to knowing when to move on. Some of us know how to seize opportunity, while others, well, they cling to what they've already lost. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I stood slowly, locking eyes with Jordan. You're right, Jordan, I said, my voice calm. Some of us do know when to move on. But before you pat yourself on the back, let me show you something. I turned to Naomi, who nodded and hit play on her phone. The speakers filled with a recording of Sophia recounting her experiences with Jordan. His lies, his manipulation, his abuse. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, and I watched as Jordan's face twisted in anger and panic. What the hell is this? He demanded, his voice rising. This, I said, stepping closer to him, is the truth. The truth about who you are, Jordan. A liar, a manipulator, and a coward. He lunged at me, but I was ready. With one swift motion, I grabbed him by the collar and slammed him onto the table. Plates and glasses shattered, and gasps filled the room. I leaned in close, my voice low and steady. You wanted to face me like a man? Here I am. Jordan struggled, but I held him firm. You're done, I said. Everyone here knows who you really are. There's no more running, no more hiding. This is where your story ends. The moment was caught on camera by Naomi, who had positioned herself perfectly to record the altercation. As I released Jordan and stepped back, he stumbled to his feet, his face red with rage and humiliation. This isn't over, he spat, glaring at me. "Oh, it's over," I replied. "And by tomorrow, everyone will know it." Jordan stormed out of the house, dragging Lila behind him. But the damage was done. The video, paired with Sophia's testimony, was uploaded that night, spreading like wildfire. By morning, Jordan's reputation was in ruins. His arrogance, his manipulations, and his downfall were laid bare for all to see. As for Lila, she tried to salvage what little dignity she had left, but the cracks in her facade were too deep to hide. She had tied her fate to a man who had nothing left to offer, and now she was facing the consequences. The evening marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Jordan was finished, Lila was exposed, and I was free. Free to move forward, free to rebuild, and free to live a life unburdened by lies and betrayal. The alpha had fallen, and the reckoning was complete. The fallout from Naomi's leaked video of the dinner party was immediate and far-reaching. Within hours of the video being posted, it began circulating on social media, gaining traction as people shared, commented, and reacted to the shocking revelations. The recording showed not only Jordan's arrogant taunts and physical confrontation, but also Sophia's testimony about his manipulative and abusive behavior. While the initial focus was on Jordan, Lila quickly found herself pulled into the storm. At first, Lila tried to deny everything, brushing off questions from friends and family with vague explanations about the video being edited or taken out of context. But as more people saw the evidence, and as Jordan's behavior in the video aligned with Sophia's testimony, denial became impossible. Her co-workers whispered behind her back, her social media accounts were flooded with criticism, and even close friends began distancing themselves. Lila's family, particularly her parents, were devastated. Her mother called, her voice shaking with disappointment, asking how she could have betrayed Ethan, a man who had always treated her with kindness and respect. "We raised you better than this, Lila," her mother said, her voice breaking. "How could you throw everything away for someone like him?" Lila had no answers. For the first time, the consequences of her choices were crashing down on her, and she had no one to turn to. Jordan, the man she had risked everything for, was facing his own avalanche of judgment and was in no position to offer her support. In fact, he was becoming increasingly distant, leaving her to face the fallout on her own. Her workplace became another source of humiliation. Colleagues who had once admired her now regarded her with suspicion and disdain. Her manager called her into the office to discuss the distraction her personal life was causing in the workplace. "Your behavior has become a liability," they told her. Within weeks, she was quietly let go, her position deemed redundant. The life Lila had known was unraveling, and for the first time, she realized just how much she had lost. The stability and respect she had taken for granted in her marriage to Ethan, the trust of her family and friends, the security of her career, it was all gone. Amid the chaos, Lila turned to the one person she thought might still care, Ethan. She showed up at his door one evening, disheveled and tearful, clutching the divorce papers she had refused to sign. "Ethan, please," she began, her voice trembling. "Can we just talk?" Ethan stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "There's nothing left to talk about, Lila." "But I made a mistake," she pleaded. "I didn't realize what I was doing. I was confused. Please, let's fix this." "Fix this?" Ethan repeated, his voice calm but firm. "You destroyed our marriage, Lila. You lied, cheated, and chose someone else over the life we built together. There's no fixing that." Tears streamed down her face as she tried to explain herself, but Ethan held his ground. "I loved you, Lila. I gave you everything I had, and you threw it away for a man who couldn't care less about you. Now, you're facing the consequences of your choices, and you want me to save you? I won't do it." "But what about everything we've been through?" she whispered. "Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It did," Ethan said, his voice heavy with finality. "But it doesn't anymore." He handed her the divorce papers, now finalized, and explained the terms. "Your infidelity voided any claims to our shared assets. The house is mine, as are the savings and investments. You'll receive nothing beyond the essentials." Lila's face crumpled as she realized the full extent of her loss. "You can't do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I already have," Ethan replied. "This isn't about revenge anymore, Lila. It's about moving on. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." While Lila struggled to navigate the fallout, Sophia found a new sense of purpose in sharing her story. With Ethan's support, she agreed to give an interview to a prominent journalist, detailing her experiences with Jordan's manipulation and abuse. The interview was raw and emotional, painting a vivid picture of the psychological toll her relationship with Jordan had taken. Sophia's revelations were powerful, and they resonated with many people who had suffered similar experiences. Other victims of Jordan's manipulations began to come forward, sharing their own stories of how he had used charm and coercion to control them. The picture that emerged was damning. Jordan was a serial manipulator who left a trail of broken relationships and shattered lives wherever he went. Ethan helped amplify Sophia's voice, ensuring her story reached a wide audience. He connected her with legal resources and advocacy groups that could provide support and help hold Jordan accountable for his actions. The narrative shifted from a simple affair scandal to a larger conversation about toxic relationships and the importance of recognizing manipulation and abuse. Jordan's reputation, already tarnished by the dinner party video, was utterly destroyed. His professional network collapsed, his social circles dissolved, and his attempts to rebuild his image were met with widespread derision. He had become a cautionary tale, a man whose arrogance and deceit had finally caught up with him. For Lila, the consequences were lasting. Her attempts to reconcile with Ethan had failed, and Jordan's downfall left her with no support system. She moved into a small apartment, far removed from the comfortable home she had once shared with Ethan, and took a job that barely covered her expenses. The vibrant, confident woman she had once been was now a shadow of herself, burdened by regret and the weight of her choices. Ethan, meanwhile, began to rebuild his life. Free from the toxicity of his marriage, he found solace in the support of friends like Daniel and Naomi, who had stood by him through the worst of it. Sophia's courage inspired him, and he admired her resilience as she worked to turn her pain into a platform for change. Through it all, Ethan remained steadfast in his resolve. He had faced betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak, but he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined to live a life defined by integrity and self-respect. Lila's reckoning was complete, and Ethan's journey of healing was well underway. Jordan's fall from grace began the moment Naomi's video from the dinner party started making the rounds. In it, he was exposed for who he truly was: arrogant, manipulative, and out of control. The footage, combined with Sophia's powerful testimony about her abusive past with him, was a devastating blow to his carefully curated image as a confident, successful alpha male. The cracks in his professional and personal facade widened quickly, and the avalanche that followed was both inevitable and absolute. Jordan's workplace, once his fortress of power, became the first battleground of his collapse. His colleagues, who had long tolerated his domineering behavior because of his apparent success, began to question his value. The clients and partners he had wooed with his charm and bravado started withdrawing their support, unwilling to be associated with the controversy surrounding him. Key business associates reached out to his company's board, demanding answers. "We can't be affiliated with someone whose personal life is a public scandal," one major client wrote in an email that quickly circulated internally. The board, desperate to contain the fallout, convened an emergency meeting. Jordan, sensing the tide turning against him, arrived at the meeting armed with excuses and bravado. "This is a smear campaign," he insisted, his voice loud and defiant. "That video was taken out of context. It's a personal matter, not a reflection of my work." But his usual tactics, charm, intimidation, and bluster, didn't work this time. The board members, faced with mounting pressure from stakeholders and the media, saw Jordan for what he truly was: a liability. They voted unanimously to force his resignation, citing his unprofessional conduct and the irreparable damage he had done to the company's reputation. The announcement of his resignation was swift and public, accompanied by a carefully worded statement from the board. Jordan's name was scrubbed from the company's website, and within days, his professional contacts had evaporated. He tried to rally support from his remaining allies, but many of them distanced themselves, unwilling to risk their own careers by standing beside him. "You've burned too many bridges, Jordan," one former colleague told him bluntly when Jordan reached out for help. "Nobody's going to stick their neck out for you." Jordan's professional collapse was mirrored in his personal life. Friends who had once admired his confidence and charisma now saw him as toxic and manipulative. The same charm that had drawn people to him became a bitter reminder of his deceit. His social circles disintegrated as former friends turned their backs, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. His family, too, began to distance themselves. His parents, embarrassed by the public disgrace, stopped returning his calls. His siblings, who had long resented his arrogance and dismissive attitude, saw the fallout as a kind of poetic justice. Even Isabel, his younger sister, severed ties after learning the full extent of his actions. "You've humiliated all of us," Isabel told him during their last conversation. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to be your sister right now? I can't defend you anymore." Jordan's personal relationships, once a source of pride, became a glaring reminder of his isolation. People he had once considered allies now avoided him, unwilling to risk their reputations by being seen in his company. The invitations to dinners and events stopped. His phone, once buzzing with messages and calls, fell silent. Jordan's arrogance, which had once been his greatest weapon, became his greatest weakness. He believed he could rebuild, that his charisma and persistence would be enough to win back the respect and influence he had lost. But every attempt to claw his way back was met with resistance. He tried starting a new business, leveraging what little savings he had left. But potential investors, wary of his reputation, refused to take his calls. Attempts to network were met with cold shoulders and thinly veiled scorn. Even his name, once a symbol of confidence and success, had become synonymous with failure and disgrace. Jordan's financial situation deteriorated rapidly. With no income and mounting legal fees from lawsuits tied to his professional misconduct, he was forced to sell his luxury car and move out of his penthouse apartment. He ended up in a modest rental on the outskirts of the city, far removed from the life of excess and opulence he had once flaunted. Despair began to set in. Jordan, the self-proclaimed alpha, found himself utterly powerless. The man who had thrived on dominance and control was now at the mercy of his circumstances. His attempts to reach out to Lila, hoping for some semblance of support, were met with silence. She had her own battles to fight and no interest in rekindling their connection. The final blow came when his story became fodder for national media. Articles and opinion pieces dissected his downfall, using him as an example of hubris and the consequences of unchecked arrogance. One particularly scathing piece described him as the man who built his empire on manipulation, only to watch it crumble under the weight of his lies. In his darkest moments, Jordan was forced to confront the reality he had spent years avoiding. His ruin wasn't the result of bad luck or a smear campaign. It was the inevitable consequence of his own actions. He had built his life on manipulation, deceit, and arrogance, and now, stripped of his power and influence, he was left with nothing. He tried to blame others, Sophia for coming forward, Ethan for exposing him, Naomi for leaking the video, but deep down, he knew the truth. His downfall was his own doing, and there was no one left to blame but himself. For a time, Jordan entertained thoughts of revenge, fantasizing about ways to rebuild his life and strike back at those who had wronged him. But the harsh reality of his situation made it clear that revenge was a luxury he could no longer afford. He was a man without allies, without resources, and without the means to fight back. Jordan, once the life of every room he entered, became a shadow of his former self. He spent his days in isolation, avoiding the public eye and drowning in his regrets. The man who had prided himself on his strength and dominance was now broken, a cautionary tale of what happens when arrogance goes unchecked. His name, once a symbol of power, had become a punchline, and as he sat alone in his empty apartment, staring at the remnants of his former life, he realized that the only person he had truly defeated was himself. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I was free from the lies, the deceit, and the constant feeling that something was missing. The chapter with Lila was over, and I was ready to start anew. It wasn't just about moving on from her. It was about rediscovering who I was outside of that toxic marriage. I took some time off work after everything settled. The chaos of the past few months had left me drained, and I needed space to breathe. My first priority was rebuilding the parts of my life I had neglected during the marriage. I began reconnecting with old friends, people I had unintentionally drifted away from while trying to salvage a relationship that was already broken. One of those friends was Daniel. He had been my rock throughout the ordeal, and I owed him more than I could ever repay. We spent hours catching up, not just on the fallout of the divorce, but on the good things we had missed in each other's lives. He reminded me of the importance of having a support system, and I made a vow never to take friendships like his for granted again. I also began focusing on myself in ways I hadn't in years. I picked up old hobbies I had abandoned: photography, hiking, even woodworking. These activities, which had once brought me so much joy, now became outlets for healing and growth. I found solace in the simplicity of crafting something with my hands, of capturing the beauty of the world through a lens. Each project, each photo, felt like a small step toward reclaiming the person I used to be. My fitness became another priority. I started running again, not just for the physical benefits, but for the mental clarity it provided. Every mile felt like I was shedding another layer of the past, leaving behind the bitterness and anger that had consumed me for so long. It wasn't just about looking better. It was about feeling better, about proving to myself that I could rebuild my life on my terms. As I began to settle into this new phase of my life, Naomi reached out with a suggestion that caught me off guard. "Ethan," she said during one of our coffee catch-ups, "there's someone I think you should meet." I raised an eyebrow, unsure of where she was going with this. "Naomi," I said cautiously, "if this is a setup—" "It's not a setup," she interrupted, though her grin betrayed her intentions. "Okay, maybe it's a little bit of a setup, but hear me out. Her name is Rachel, and she's a good friend of mine. She's smart, kind, and, well, I think you two would get along." I hesitated. The idea of dating again felt daunting, almost surreal. I wasn't sure if I was ready to open myself up to someone new. But Naomi was persistent, and eventually, I agreed to meet Rachel for a casual lunch. Rachel was nothing like Lila, and that was exactly what I needed. She was grounded and thoughtful, with a quiet strength that I found immediately comforting. We talked about everything: work, hobbies, our favorite books, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. There was no pretense, no games, just two people getting to know each other. By the end of the lunch, I felt a spark I hadn't expected, a small but undeniable flicker of hope. We started seeing each other more often, taking things slow and steady. Rachel understood my hesitations and never pushed for more than I was ready to give. Her patience and kindness were a stark contrast to the chaos I had left behind, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could be myself without fear of judgment or betrayal. As my relationship with Rachel grew, so did my understanding of the journey that had brought me here. In the quiet moments, while working on a woodworking project, during a run through the park, or while watching the sunset with Rachel, I found myself reflecting on everything I had been through. The betrayal, the anger, the revenge. It had all shaped me, but it didn't define me. I realized that while the darkness of those days had been overwhelming, it had also been necessary. It had forced me to confront truths I had been avoiding, to make difficult choices, and to fight for my own dignity and self-respect. The justice I had delivered wasn't about punishing Lila or Jordan. It was about reclaiming my life. And now that I had, I was determined to move forward with integrity. One of the most profound lessons I learned was the importance of honesty, not just with others, but with myself. I had spent so much of my marriage pretending things were fine, ignoring the signs of trouble because I didn't want to face the truth. But pretending had only prolonged the pain. Honesty, as painful as it could be, was the only way to truly heal. I also learned the value of boundaries. In my relationship with Lila, I had given too much, sacrificing my own needs and happiness in an effort to make things work. With Rachel, I was careful to maintain a balance, ensuring that I didn't lose myself in the process. It wasn't about being guarded. It was about being mindful, about protecting the person I had worked so hard to rebuild. Most importantly, I learned that moving on wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about making peace with it. The betrayal and heartbreak would always be part of my story, but they didn't have to define my future. I could acknowledge the pain without letting it control me. I could remember the lessons without carrying the weight. As the months passed, my new life began to take shape. Rachel and I continued to grow closer, finding joy in the simple moments we shared. My friendships with Daniel and Naomi remained strong. Their support a constant reminder of the people who had stood by me when I needed them most. My hobbies flourished, and I even began mentoring young professionals in my field, finding fulfillment in helping others navigate their own challenges. The future felt open, full of possibilities I hadn't dared to imagine before. I wasn't naive. I knew there would still be challenges, moments of doubt, and difficult days. But I also knew that I had the strength to face them. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up, and that foundation was stronger than ever. Looking back, I realized that the most important thing I had gained wasn't revenge or justice. It was freedom. Freedom from the lies, the toxicity, and the weight of a relationship that had been dragging me down. Freedom to live a life defined by honesty, respect, and love. As I stood on the balcony of my new home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The past was behind me, the future was mine to create, and for the first time in a long time, I was truly at ease. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it. I found out about Maya's law school graduation party the way most people learn about a sale they weren't invited to, through someone else's joy. I was scrolling through the family group chat when a burst of pictures popped in, one after another like fireworks I hadn't been warned about. First came the champagne tower, liquid gold spilling from the top flute in a cascade. Then the cake, three-tiered, marble fondant, with Esquire Maya Collins scripted in gold cursive that looked like it cost more than the last 3 months of our groceries combined. There were candid shots too, Maya in a fitted gold gown, arms around people I'd never seen, laughing like she'd already made it. Not a trace of me anywhere. At first, I thought maybe there had been some mistake. That's the cruel thing about hope. It clings even when you're holding a dagger. I scrolled back up. No text, no call, no personal message. Just snapshots from a celebration I didn't know was happening. I stared at the screen, that heavy feeling pooling in my chest like cold oil. I'd been covering $950 of her rent every month for nearly 3 years, sent in over $5,000 every term for her tuition and supplies. And I wasn't even worth a courtesy text? Not even an "I wish you could be here." I told myself there had to be some oversight. Maybe she thought I was working. Maybe she tried to surprise me. Maybe. That word kept me moving. Maybe was the only reason I ironed my shirt and showed up anyway. The venue was a rental hall draped in white linen and gold trim. From the outside, it looked like something out of a bridal magazine. A white Bentley sat parked near the entrance like a paid prop. I walked up slowly, watching as strangers in tuxedos and shimmering dresses walked and laughing, as if they knew exactly where they belonged. I didn't see Maya at first, just more photos being snapped, more champagne being poured. Everything about it screamed curated perfection, like the kind of life Maya had always hinted she deserved. The kind I was supposed to provide. Still, I pushed open the door. The scent of roses and catered lamb hit me first, followed by the music, some soft jazz mix that didn't match the volume of the chatter. I stood there, half in, half out, unsure if I should take another step or turn back. Then I saw her. She was radiant, I'll give her that. Hair styled into soft waves, makeup flawless, that golden dress hugging every curve like a designer's final sketch. She was holding a glass of champagne, laughing with someone who looked like a lawyer already. Gray temples, sharp eyes, expensive cufflinks. She saw me and blinked. Once, like she was trying to compute how I'd found her. Her father, Franklin, was nearby, hands clasped behind his back like he owned the building. He didn't even pretend to hide the smirk when his eyes met mine. I hadn't seen Jeanette yet, but I could feel her presence. The kind of woman who watched you like a security camera, always recording, never blinking. Uncle Terrence was by the bar, already 3 drinks in from the way his voice carried, and somewhere near the dessert table was Cousin Rhea, watching me like she was expecting this exact moment. I thought Maya might come to me, say something, anything. But she turned away, laughed, clinked her glass with someone else's. I stood there like a misplaced coat, waiting to be noticed. Then I saw it, on the far end of the room, just before the arch of flowers. The cake. Esquire Maya Collins. Gold foil letters. No space for a husband's name. Not even a mention. It hit me harder than I expected. Not just the omission, but the intention behind it. This wasn't just forgetting to invite me. This was deliberate. This was a curated life with all the frayed edges tucked away. And I was the edge. Still, I stayed longer than I should have. Watch them dance. Watch them toast. Someone said, to Maya and her future. Another said, she did it all on her own. I nearly laughed. I thought about every night I worked overtime, every skipped meal, every late bill just to make sure her tuition went through. But none of that mattered here. Here, I was invisible. I didn't make a scene. I didn't tap a fork against glass and announce who I was. I just left. Quietly. Back through the floral archway. Back into the night that suddenly felt colder. The drive home was a blur of taillights and questions I knew would never be answered. I wanted to be angry, but all I felt was this ache, deep and tired. Like the ache that settles in your bones when you've been standing too long in the wrong place, waiting for someone to notice. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't text her. I didn't call. I just sat at the edge of the bed, staring at my shoes, still slightly scuffed despite the polish. That's when I knew this wasn't a mistake. It was a message, and I had finally read it. I didn't sleep much that night. Sleep felt like a reward for the emotionally intact. I just lay there, my mind spinning between shame and resolve. The humiliation clung to my skin like cheap cologne, and no amount of pacing or deep breaths washed it off. By morning, I still hadn't received a call, a text, or even a pity emoji from Maya. Nothing. But I still needed answers. Closure, if that even applied to a man discarded like junk mail. So I decided to go back. Not for drama. Not to argue. Just to look her in the eye and see if she could tell me to my face that I didn't matter. I put on a clean white shirt, pressed it the best I could, and stepped into my most presentable pair of shoes. They were worn, sure. A little frayed at the edges. But they had walked me through years of sacrifice, each crease earned, not inherited. I stood in the mirror for a moment and gave myself one last look. Not flashy, not broke. Just real. Something that party had no use for. When I got to the venue, the morning sun hadn't even burned off the night's chill. Most of the guests had likely already returned to their condos and curated lives. But a few people were still hanging around. Event staff cleaning up, caterers hauling trays, security standing idle but alert. I walked up to the main entrance with a calm I didn't entirely believe in and nodded at the nearest guard. I'm here to see Maya Collins. I'm her husband. He didn't move, just tilted his head slightly and narrowed his eyes like I'd spoken another language. Then he turned to another guard, a younger man with a clipboard and an earpiece, and murmured something. Clipboard guy looked me up and down, then walked off into the building. I waited. 5 minutes. Then 10. I could feel eyes on me. The cleanup crew whispering. I was dressed too plain to be a guest, too determined to be ignored. Then the glass doors swung open. Maya walked out first, her expression unreadable. Behind her was her father, Franklin, moving like a man eager for confrontation. He had that same smug posture he always carried around me. Shoulders pulled back like his money gave him extra spine. Maya didn't say hi, didn't ask how I was. She didn't even ask why I came. She simply said, he doesn't belong here. Just like that. Like I was some drifter off the street trying to sneak into a members-only club. I stared at her, searching her face for some crack, some flicker of regret or uncertainty. There was none. She looked past me, like I wasn't even human. Franklin, though, he grinned. You really thought you were welcome? He asked, his voice laced with condescension so thick it could choke. I wanted to reply. 1,000 words flashed through my mind, some poetic, some profane. But I just stood there, too tired to engage in their performance. I turned to Maya and held her gaze. Okay, I said, not out of defeat, out of clarity. If she could look at me like that, here, after everything, we were done pretending. Then I turned and walked away. There was no dramatic music, no slow clap, no lightning bolt of vindication. Just the sound of my footsteps on the pavement and the echo of her silence. But even that silence was louder than anything she'd ever said to me in private. She didn't chase after me, didn't explain, didn't even blink. She let me go with the same ease she'd let me fund her life. By the time I got home, the numbness had hardened into something colder. I unlocked the door, stepped into the stillness of my one-bedroom apartment, and didn't bother to take off my shoes. I sat down at the kitchen table, pulled out my phone, and opened our message thread. There were no unread messages, just a string of older texts, me asking about her classes, her schedule, whether she needed help with anything. Most went unanswered or got the typical, "I'm busy, babe. Love you, though." I stared at the blank text bar for a long time. Then I typed exactly what needed to be said. "Starting next month, you'll be paying your own rent. Best of luck." I hit send. There was no firework inside me, no sense of reclaiming my power, just a quiet weight lifting. The kind of relief that comes from setting something heavy down, not because you're done carrying it, but because you finally realize you never had to. I turned off my phone. No need to watch her scramble or respond with those manipulative little half apologies she always used when things got tight. "You know how law school is," she'd say. Or, "You're the only one I can count on." Not anymore. Let her count someone else. Let her count her own dollars, her own debts, her own regrets. Tonight, for the first time in years, I would only be paying one person's bills, mine. It was almost noon when the knock came. I was sitting on the couch, half-dressed, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold before I took my second sip. I hadn't turned the lights on. The sunlight spilling through the window was enough, bare, honest, unfiltered. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most of the people who knew where I lived didn't bother showing up uninvited. Except one. I opened the door, and there she was, Maya. Still in the same gold dress from the party, but the glow was gone. Her hair was matted to one side, and her mascara had left streaks like black rivers down her cheeks. Her voice wavered. "Please, don't do this." No preamble. No apology. Just desperation wearing high heels. She stepped inside without waiting for permission. I didn't stop her. Maybe part of me still needed to hear her out, needed to give her that last chance to say something, anything, that would make it make sense. She sat on the edge of the couch like a guest, careful not to wrinkle the dress, even now. That told me more than I needed to know. "You know I can't afford it right now," she said, fingers twisted in her lap. "The exams, the legal aid clinic night shifts, it's been brutal. I've been trying to keep everything together." I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded, letting her talk. She was always good at filling the air with just enough emotion to make you second-guess your instincts. She talked about being exhausted, about juggling cases and coursework, about the pressure of being a black woman in law school where nobody expected her to win. She said, "You've always been my rock." She said, "You don't understand what it's like." I let her say all of it. Every last line. I didn't interrupt, didn't nod, didn't even blink. When she was finished, I asked just one question. "Why weren't your grandparents at the party?" The silence that followed hit harder than anything she'd said. Her eyes widened, just slightly, and her mouth opened without sound. I repeated it, slow, measured. "Your grandparents. Where were they?" She looked away. Her voice dropped. "Mom didn't want them stealing attention." And that was it. That was the sentence that turned everything from confusion into clarity. She hadn't just excluded me. She'd excluded them too. The people who raised her when her mom couldn't, who stood at every middle school spelling bee, who scraped together money when she needed textbooks. And why? Because they might steal attention? That's when it all clicked. This wasn't about forgetting me. This was about control. It was about the image she wanted to present. And anyone who didn't fit neatly into her curated display, me, her grandparents, anyone too real, was pushed off stage like furniture after a dress rehearsal. I took a breath. "So we're all disposable, huh? Just props until the photos get taken?" Her face tightened. "It's not like that." "No? Then what is it like, Maya? Enlighten me." "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, and for the first time her voice cracked. "But you did. I didn't think you'd show." I almost laughed. "So that makes it better? That makes it okay." "No. But I was scared you'd embarrass me. You always say things. You don't fit." And there it was. The truth she couldn't unsay. I didn't fit. Not her image. Not her idea of success. Not her law school aesthetic or her father's expectations. Not the life she built in her head where she wore gold gowns and took pictures with people who used the word network as a verb. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't break anything. I just stood still and let it wash over me like cold rain. "I paid for that apartment," I said quietly. "I paid for those textbooks. For the new tires on your car. For the groceries you never stocked. You're walking around in a dress that probably cost more than our entire first vacation, and you couldn't even send me a text." She wiped her face, but the mascara only smeared more. "I made a mistake." I nodded. "Yeah, you did." She looked up, her voice suddenly soft. "So what now?" I thought about it. About all the times I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. About every holiday I'd spent at her parents' table pretending not to hear the jabs. About how many nights I went to bed wondering if I was doing enough for her, for us. I walked to the door and opened it. "You figure that out," I said. "You're the lawyer now." She didn't move. "Please, just tell me you don't hate me." I shook my head. "I don't hate you, Maya. I just don't trust you." She stood up slowly, like her body weighed more than it used to. Maybe it did. Guilt is heavier than gold. She stepped outside, pausing in the hallway. "You said you were my rock." "Rocks don't move," I replied. I finally did. Then I closed the door. And for the first time since that damned group chat lit up my screen, I actually exhaled. I didn't wait for Maya to text back. I didn't check to see if she cried again or if she made it home in that glittery dress with her pride in a pile on the floorboard. None of that mattered anymore. What did matter, what finally clicked in my bones, was that I didn't owe her. Not anymore. Not one more dollar. Not one more ounce of grace. Not one more version of myself that twisted to fit her reflection. So I called Franklin. He answered on the second ring, like he was waiting on the other end. I could hear the smug in his breath before he even spoke. "Didn't expect to hear from you again." "You will now," I said. "I'm calling to make this crystal clear. I'm done." A pause. "Done with what?" he asked, but I could hear the shift in his tone. He knew exactly what. No more rent. No more tuition help. No more covering for Maya when she overspins and lies about it. "I'm done funding your daughter's fantasy life." Franklin scoffed. "Oh, come on now. Don't be dramatic. You don't have kids. No mortgage. You can afford it." That line hit like a cold slap. "I can afford it," I repeated, "because I didn't screw up my life pretending to be someone I'm not. That doesn't make me your ATM." "You married her," he said casually, as if that alone justified everything. "I married her," I said. "But I didn't sign up to be the invisible sponsor of your family's image campaign." Franklin chuckled. "You're being emotional." "No," I said calmly. "I'm being finished." Then I hung up. I didn't wait for a reply. Didn't give him room to manipulate the conversation the way he always did, turning logic into guilt, silence into obligation. I wasn't that man anymore. 20 minutes later, there was another knock at the door. At first, I didn't move. Thought it might be Maya again, trying one more time to spin the wheel. But when I looked through the peephole, it wasn't her. It was Rhea. She stood there in black joggers and a hoodie, phone in one hand, backpack slung over one shoulder. No makeup. No pretense. I opened the door, still cautious. "You all right?" I asked. She nodded, but her eyes were stormy. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She walked in and sat down like she'd done it 100 times, though this was only the second time she'd ever been in my space. The first was a Thanksgiving when Maya insisted we host. Rhea was the only one who helped with dishes. She pulled out her phone and opened something. "I need you to see this." "What is it?" She turned the screen to me. A private group chat. Not the one Maya had with the family. Not the one I was in. This one was different, just Maya and a few of her close friends. The ones who called me the quiet one when they met me. The ones who toasted Maya's graduation without ever asking who paid for her cap and gown. The messages were there in plain text. "He still thinks I married him for love. He's my ATM with a wedding ring. He showed up like a puppy begging for scraps." God, it was so awkward. Franklin wanted to have security remove him sooner. I read them all. Every line. My hands didn't shake. My throat didn't close. There was just a quiet sort of finality, like hearing the last brick slide into place on a tomb. I looked up at Rhea. "Why are you showing me this?" Her voice was soft, tired. "Because I'm tired of being quiet." I blinked. Of all the people, she was the one who saw it. "She's always been like this," Rhea added. "But she used to have lines she wouldn't cross. Now? It's all performance. All manipulation." I didn't speak for a while. I just nodded, slowly, then reached for my own phone. Opened the family group chat. No caption. No warning. I posted the screenshots. Then I typed one line. "Let me show you what your perfect daughter really thinks of me." And I hit send. A flood of scene ticks appeared. Then silence. No one defended her. No one offered excuses. Aunt Clarice quietly left the chat. Franklin didn't type a word. Jeanette went offline. It wasn't about revenge. It was about the truth. And maybe, for once, the truth got to take center stage. Rhea stood and slipped her phone back into her pocket. "I should go. I've already pissed off half the family by just being here." "You good?" I asked. She nodded. "Yeah. I just needed you to know. You weren't crazy. You weren't alone. I walked her to the door. Just before she stepped out, she turned back. For what it's worth, you were too good for her. Some of us saw it. We just didn't say anything. Thanks, I said. Next time, say it sooner. She smiled, small and sad. Next time. And then she was gone. After Rhea left, the apartment settled into a silence so thick I could almost hear it breathing. The kind of silence that follows a storm, not because the damage is done, but because no one's sure where to begin cleaning up. I stood in the middle of the living room, phone still in hand, rereading the screenshots I'd posted. I hadn't added commentary, hadn't stirred the pot beyond that one line. Let me show you what your perfect daughter really thinks of me. That was all it took. Within minutes of sending it, the group chat had gone quiet like a tomb. I could see they were reading it. Franklin, Jeanette, Uncle Terrence. Even the ones who barely interacted, like Maya's older cousin Deborah from Atlanta, or her church friend Clara who never liked me but smiled through her teeth. All of them had seen the post, but no one typed. No one responded. No one defended her. Then I saw it, Aunt Clarice, the family's so-called moral compass, left the chat without a word. That said everything. I tossed the phone onto the couch and sat down beside it, elbows resting on my knees. There wasn't any joy in it. No sense of triumph or vindication. Just the slow, aching confirmation that I had been the only one pretending things were fine. Maya had been living in her own scripted narrative, and I'd been nothing more than a placeholder character, good for bills, background support, and clean credit. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. All the little moments started replaying now with brutal clarity. Like the time I offered to cook for her study group, and she told me not to bother, that they'd just grab something out. Or when she told her friends I was in tech, instead of admitting I worked retail IT, like the truth was something to be polished before it could be presented. I had ignored so many signs. Love does that. It makes excuses before you even open your mouth. I closed my eyes for what felt like a second but must have been longer because the buzz of a message pulled me back. It was Calvin. Yo, that post was real. Calvin was my coworker. We weren't best friends, but he was solid. A good man. Showed up when he said he would. Checked in when no one else did. Yeah, every word. Damn. You okay? Getting there. He didn't push. Just sent a thumbs up and the praying hands emoji. It was more than Maya's entire family had managed to say. I put the phone on silent and got up to grab water, my throat suddenly dry. As I turned on the tap, a quiet knock sounded from the door. I froze. A small part of me hoped it was Calvin or maybe Rhea again. But when I opened it, there was no familiar face. Just a stranger, mid-30s, buzz-cut, blue security uniform with a stitched name tag, Mr. Graves. He held a manila envelope in one hand. Evening, he said with a nod. You Lewis? Yeah. He handed me the envelope. This was dropped off at the front desk. I was told to make sure you got it directly. I took it slowly, confused. By who? He gave a half smile. Didn't say. Just told me it's better if you read it in private. I thanked him and shut the door, envelope still warm in my hands. My name was scribbled on the front in Maya's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It read, If you wanted to destroy me, you're doing a great job. But you don't know everything. Be careful who you trust. Not everyone on your side is being honest. No greeting. No apology. Just a warning laced in bitterness. Classic Maya, always playing defense even when she was clearly in the wrong. But it wasn't her handwriting that bothered me. It was the line, not everyone on your side is being honest. I sat down again and stared at the paper. Was she bluffing? Or was this her last-ditch effort to sow doubt? Either way, it didn't change what I knew to be true. Maya had lied. She had mocked me behind my back. She had used my money, my time, and my presence to build her illusion, and discarded me the second I no longer fit the image. And now that I'd exposed it, she was lashing out. But the damage had already been done. I picked up my phone again and reread Rhea's messages, the timestamps, the blunt truth she handed me without fanfare. I trusted that. Not because I wanted to, but because she had nothing to gain. And that's what made the difference. Maya's life had become a web of gain. Transaction over truth. Appearances over accountability. And now the mask had cracked. Badly. Let them deal with the shards. I didn't tell anyone I was going. Not Calvin. Not Rhea. Not even my neighbor who usually gave a nod any time I passed his door. I didn't want backup or witnesses or a phone recording in my pocket. I wanted clarity. One-on-one. Face-to-face. No more middlemen. No more messages. The drive to the Collins house was long enough to doubt myself and short enough not to talk myself out of it. Their neighborhood looked the same: pristine hedges, pale driveways, silent wind chimes barely moving. A place where the problems were hidden behind tasteful drapery and security systems. I pulled up to the same house I used to visit with wine or baked goods in hand, trying too hard to earn favor I'd never be granted. This time I brought nothing. I knocked once. Jeanette opened the door like she'd been expecting the moment all morning. Her posture was stiff, but her eyes didn't flinch. She didn't offer a greeting or an invitation, just a step backward, enough room to pass, not enough warmth to call it welcome. Franklin was already in the living room, seated like a king in his leather recliner, a wine glass in hand that was more accessory than necessity. He didn't stand. Didn't look surprised either. The man was ready for a confrontation. He just thought he'd win it by sitting down. "Maya's not here," Jeanette said. Once I stepped in. I didn't come for her. The silence that followed was thick, like the walls themselves were waiting to eavesdrop. I stayed standing. Franklin took a slow sip and arched an eyebrow, like he expected a performance. "I came to say what I should have said a long time ago," I began. My voice wasn't loud. I wasn't angry. Just tired and finally clear. I was good to this family. Even when I wasn't wanted, I showed up. I paid for things I couldn't afford, stayed quiet when I was disrespected, and carried the weight of Maya's dreams like they were mine. And the second it was time for her to stand in the light, I was treated like a stain on her dress. Franklin chuckled, dry and without humor. "You're feeling sorry for yourself." "No," I said. "I'm feeling done." Jeanette's lips parted like she might say something, but I cut in before she had the chance. I kept my mouth shut every Thanksgiving when Uncle Terrence cracked jokes about men who let women go to school on their dime. I kept quiet when you, I looked directly at Franklin, called me a stepping stone under your breath when you thought I couldn't hear. I smiled through every sideways comment, every passive insult dressed as advice. Franklin's face didn't change. He was good at that, sitting behind his money like it was a shield. "You're emotional," he said again, as if the repetition would make it a fact. "I'm observant," I corrected. "And I'm no longer for sale." Jeanette sat down finally, on the edge of the cream-colored couch she always protected with throw pillows that never got touched. "What do you want, Louis?" "I don't want anything. That's the point. I'm not here to beg for acknowledgement or fight for a seat at a table that was never mine. I'm here to tell you that I see you now. All of you." Franklin tapped his glass. "So what? You're just going to post our family business online and call it justice?" "I didn't post your family business," I said. "I posted mine. The part of it you pretended didn't exist. No names. No locations. Just truth." His eyes narrowed slightly. I could tell that bothered him more than anything. Losing control of the narrative. The Collins brand wasn't supposed to be messy, and now it was smeared across Reddit and whispers. I spent years thinking if I was just patient enough, generous enough, helpful enough, you'd accept me. But I finally get it. You didn't want a husband for Maya. You wanted a silent sponsor. And now that I'm done paying, I've also stopped pretending. Jeanette glanced down, hands tightening in her lap. Maybe guilt. Maybe embarrassment. Or maybe she was just rehearsing what to say to the next guest who asked why Maya's husband wasn't in the pictures. "I wish it had gone differently," she said quietly. I gave a small nod. "Me too. But wishes don't fix things. Truth does." I turned toward the door. Before I stepped out, I added one last thing. People are reading that post. And they're sharing it. Because too many of us are told to just be grateful, to smile and stay quiet. To let people treat us like background characters in their success story. I was never asking for applause. Just respect. Franklin didn't move. Jeanette didn't follow. And for once, I didn't look back to check. Outside, the sun was sharp against the windshield. I slid behind the wheel, breathing easier than I had in days. Not because they understood me, but because I had finally stopped needing them to. I didn't expect the post to go viral. I thought maybe it'd get a few likes. A handful of comments from strangers who'd been through something similar. Maybe a repost or two from someone stuck in the same cycle of quiet sacrifice. But by the time I'd driven back from the Collins house and finally checked my phone, the notifications were endless. Hundreds of comments. Thousands of likes. Shares climbing by the second. And the DMs. People pouring out stories like they'd been waiting for someone to say it first. I read them slowly, one by one, sitting on the edge of my bed like I wasn't sure if I should feel vindicated or just sad. The usernames blurred together after a while, but the words stuck. Messages like, "My ex did the same thing. used me like a ladder, then pretended I never existed. This hit me hard. I was the stepping stone, too. You're not alone. Thank you for saying what so many of us couldn't. A few people were angry for me, raging on my behalf like I hadn't even allowed myself to. Others just related. Quietly. Honestly. People who had played supporting roles in lives they'd funded, raised, held up, and then been written out of the credits when the spotlight came. But one comment stopped me cold. It was buried in the thread, just above someone tagging a friend. It read, "I know her. Maya Collins. She used to joke that her husband was her scholarship fund. Said she married smart, not for love." That was it. No profile picture. No further detail. But I knew it was real. I didn't even need to verify. Something about the bluntness, the familiarity in the phrasing, her scholarship fund, it fit. Fit too well. I sat there for a long time, the screen burning against my palm. I wasn't hurt. Not anymore. That part of me had already been torn out and cauterized. This was different. This was confirmation. I closed the app and stared at the wall. The same beige paint I'd been meaning to repaint for years. I thought about all the things I had delayed for Maya. Buying a new mattress. Taking a solo trip. Re-enrolling in that online coding course. Every time I'd said, after her finals, or once the rent clears, or maybe when she's settled. But now I had room. Now I had space. That night, I called Grandma Nadine. She wasn't on social media. She didn't even text. But she always picked up the phone, even if her voice was slow and scratchy from sleep. "Hey, baby," she said, warmth already in her tone. "You all right?" I didn't even have to explain. She'd heard the shift in my voice. "Just processing," I said. "It's been a long week." "You eat." "Trying." "You working too hard again?" I smiled. "Not this time." I told her everything. About the party. The exclusion. The screenshots. The post. The stranger who confirmed what I'd always suspected but never wanted to believe. I didn't cry. But my voice did tremble once when I told her how I stood in that hall like a ghost at my own wife's celebration. She let the silence sit for a while before she responded. "You didn't fail, Lewis. You were just honest in a room full of performers. That's not weakness. That's clarity." I felt something loosen in my chest. I just thought, if I was good enough, they'd see me. "They did see you," she said. "And that scared them. Because you're the kind of man that reminds people of what they're pretending not to be: humble, steady, real. They dressed it up as embarrassment, but what they really felt was fear." That landed. I closed my eyes, letting her words root themselves where all the insults used to live. Her voice, soft but unwavering, became a balm to all the jagged pieces I'd carried around too long. "You've been honest," she said again. "That's more than they ever were. Let them sit in the lie." I thanked her, told her I loved her, and promised to visit soon. When I hung up, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel broken. I just felt clean. I opened the windows that night, even though it was chilly. Let the air circulate, the weight of that house, that family, that version of me float out into the dark. I knew the post would live on. People would talk. Maya would likely rage. Franklin would call it slander. Jeanette might tell everyone I was unstable, dramatic, cruel. But the truth was out, and I wasn't hiding anymore. The mask had broken. Not mine. Theirs. I was standing in the checkout line of the local grocery store, debating between spending the extra $2 on real orange juice or settling for the off-brand when I felt a presence behind me. Too close to be casual. I turned halfway, expecting a stranger impatient with the line or someone who needed to squeeze past. But it was Leon. Leon Collins. Maya's cousin. The quiet one. He barely spoke at family functions and only ever nodded when we passed each other. He always struck me as the type who watched more than he talked. I hadn't seen him since Thanksgiving 2 years ago when he handed me a plate and didn't say a word. Now here he was in a hoodie, cargo pants, and dusty sneakers, holding a small plastic bag like it weighed something heavier than food. "Hey," he said, voice low. "Can I talk to you outside?" I nodded, grabbed my bag off the counter, and followed him out into the brisk evening air. The sun had dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in tired shades of orange and gray. We stood near the carts. He didn't speak right away, just looked down at the bag in his hand. "I saw the post," he finally said. I didn't say anything. I'd gotten that sentence a lot lately, from coworkers, from old classmates, from strangers online. But this was different. This came from someone who had been in the background of it all. He handed me the plastic bag. I peeked inside. There was a sandwich wrapped in foil, 3 $20 bills folded neatly, and a crumpled napkin. No note. Just that. One meal for each time I stood by while they disrespected you, he said. My fingers tightened around the plastic. Not out of anger, just to ground myself. I wasn't expecting this. Not from him. I didn't laugh, he said quickly. When they joked, I didn't join in, but I didn't stop it either. And that's the same thing. I looked at him, trying to find the cracks in his apology. There weren't any. He looked ashamed but firm. Not performative. Not looking for forgiveness. Just showing up. I never knew what to say, he added. They act like if you're not loud, you're not loyal. I didn't have it in me to fight them, but I read what you wrote, and I saw the screenshots. It changed something. I nodded slowly. Thanks, I said, and meant it. Not because I needed the sandwich. Not even because of the money. It was the gesture. The acknowledgement. That quiet, simple admission. You were wronged. I saw it. And I'm sorry. You don't owe me anything, I said. He shook his head. I know. But I owed me this. I didn't want to stay silent anymore. A small breeze passed between us. The kind that comes with the early promise of winter. He looked around the parking lot like he wasn't sure what else to say. Then, before he turned to leave, he added, You were always better than how they treated you. I don't know if anyone else will say that, but it's true. Then he walked off. No dramatic goodbye. Just a man who did something hard and walked away from it a little lighter. I stood there for a while, holding the bag. Maybe not every relative had to go. Maybe it wasn't about burning every bridge, just making sure I never tried to cross the rotten ones again. When I got home, I set the bag on the counter and unwrapped the sandwich. Turkey and Swiss on wheat. Simple. Unassuming. No mustard, exactly how I liked it. He remembered. Or maybe he asked. Either way, it mattered. I sat at the table and ate it slowly, letting the quiet wrap around me. There was no music playing. No television humming in the background. Just the soft sound of chewing and the steady rhythm of my breath. That was the kind of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Not even when things were good with Maya. There had always been noise with her, expectation, judgment, the pressure to be shinier than I was. But this was mine. That night, I didn't scroll through the comments on my post. I didn't check for reactions or replies. I just wrote a message to myself in my journal app. Not everyone is the enemy. But not everyone deserves a second chance either. I saved it and locked the screen. I wasn't planning to forgive Maya. I wasn't looking to rebuild anything with Franklin or Jeanette. But Leon, he showed me that even in a forest of dead trees, something green could still break through the soil. It didn't mean I'd start showing up to family dinners again. It didn't mean I'd pretend nothing happened. But it meant I didn't have to carry it all as hate. Some things I could set down. Others, I'd keep my distance from. Always. I hadn't seen Quincy in years, not since the days when our biggest problems were busted sneakers and who had the highest score on NBA 2K. Life had a way of stretching friendships thin, sometimes until they snapped without anyone noticing. But every now and then, the right person resurfaces at the right time. And Quincy? He always had perfect timing. He texted me out of the blue. Saw your post, man. You good? I hesitated before replying. I'd grown tired of that question. Everyone asked if I was good, as if the answer could be measured on a scale from fine to falling apart. But Quincy wasn't just making conversation. He was checking in. Getting there. I sent back. Let's catch up. Burger spot. Our old one. You know the place. It was still there, Ray's Grill. Same chipped sign. Same rickety booth near the window that had probably been around since we were teenagers. When I pulled into the parking lot, Quincy was already waiting, leaning against his car with that lopsided grin that never changed. Look who it is, he said, pulling me into a quick hug. Mr. Viral. I shook my head. Don't start. Oh, I'm starting. Man, you broke the internet. We walked inside, the scent of grilled onions and grease wrapping around us like nostalgia. We grabbed our usual booth, his side always next to the window, mine across from the napkin dispenser. Muscle memory. We ordered 2 bacon cheeseburgers, fries, and milkshakes like we were still 17 with bottomless stomachs and no cholesterol concerns. Once the waitress left, Quincy leaned back and gave me a look. So, Maya. I took a breath. Yeah, that's over. He nodded slowly, then said, I figured. Anyone who calls her husband an ATM with a ring isn't exactly wife of the year material. I smirked. That part still surprises me. What? That she said it? No. That she meant it. We talked for a while. About the party. The exclusion. The silence that followed when I finally stood up for myself. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush to throw in platitudes. He just listened, chin resting on his fist, eyes focused like I was saying something worth hearing. "Man," he said eventually, "I'm glad you're out of it. I watched you vanish over the years. Used to call, you'd say you were busy. Texts went unanswered. You were always tired. I thought maybe it was work, but it was the weight," I said, "of carrying someone who didn't think I was worth standing next to." He let that hang in the air. It didn't need to be dressed up. The truth didn't need adjectives. Then we laughed. About old stuff. High school drama. The time we tried to fix his mom's old radio and nearly electrocuted ourselves. His first job at the movie theater where he snuck in popcorn for us during double features. We laughed like people who had nothing left to prove to each other. That's when I realized I wasn't performing anymore. I wasn't worried about saying the wrong thing or being judged or having to apologize for not being enough. Quincy saw me. Not the version I dressed up for Maya's family. Just me. We finished our food and sat in the afterglow of full stomachs and full conversation. Quincy reached for his wallet, but I waved him off. "I got it." "You sure?" he asked, half joking. "Didn't you used to have a tuition bill to cover?" I laughed harder than I had in months. Not a polite chuckle. A real, belly-deep laugh that cracked open my chest like fresh air. "Guess I finally graduated too," I said. He grinned. "Welcome to the other side." We walked out into the night, and the cold air didn't bite the way it used to. Maybe because I wasn't dragging all that weight anymore. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. Not Maya. Not Franklin. Not people who measured worth by dress codes and job titles. I looked up at the stars, quiet, distant, honest. For the first time in months, I felt human again. 2 days after dinner with Quincy, I sat in my apartment with my laptop open, cursor blinking at the blank space in a follow-up post-draft. I wasn't planning to write another one. I didn't want to be the guy whose whole personality online became the husband who got humiliated at a graduation party. But the truth is, that night, something had been turning in my chest. Not rage. Not regret. Just recognition. I'd been quiet for so long, not just with Maya but with the world. I'd let people shape the story around me. I played the role. The dependable one. The blessing Maya's family never asked for but happily used. I kept receipts. I held back. I hoped someone else would call things what they were. And then I realized no one was coming. No one was going to speak up on my behalf. So I started typing. I didn't begin with accusations. I didn't rehash the party or repost the screenshots. This one wasn't for them. This one was for me. I used to think I needed to be impressive to be respected. That if I dressed well enough, made enough, gave enough, I'd eventually be enough. But what I've learned is that some people will shrink you no matter how much you give, because your quiet dignity makes their performance feel hollow. I paused, let that truth settle. They treated me like I was the embarrassment. But the truth is, I was the mirror. And what they saw scared them. I kept writing. The words flowed easily now, not from a place of pain but from clarity. I wrote about Maya's obsession with perception, about Franklin's subtle power plays, about Jeanette's weaponized silence. I didn't name them. I didn't need to. Anyone who lived a life where love felt transactional would recognize the characters. I wasn't the one hiding. I wasn't the one afraid of being ordinary. They were. And they buried that fear under designer clothes, exclusive parties, and curated captions. I didn't embarrass the family. I just stopped letting them hide how embarrassing they already were. I hit post. There was no adrenaline rush. No surge of satisfaction. Just stillness. I sat back, folded my arms, and stared at the screen. For a moment, I didn't feel anything at all. Then I realized what it was: freedom. Not because I'd hurt someone or exposed anything, but because I'd finally said the thing I'd been holding in my throat for years. The responses came quickly again. People nodded in solidarity. Others shared how they tried to earn love from people who only understood loyalty as leverage. But this time, I didn't read every comment. I didn't need validation. I already knew. Maya called later that evening. I watched her name light up my phone first once, then twice, then a third time. I didn't answer. She didn't leave a voicemail. A few minutes later, I saw her name in my inbox. She'd sent an email. Subject, enough. Her message was 3 lines. You've embarrassed this family enough. You've made your point. Stop now. That was it. No apology. No self-reflection. Just a command cloaked in wounded pride. I hit reply. No. I just stopped letting you pretend I was the problem. I clicked send and then blocked her email. Then Franklin texted. Just a single word. Wow. Blocked. Then Jeanette. A paragraph long. Guilt wrapped in concern, trying to paint me as ungrateful, as unstable. Blocked. There was a time when I would have spiraled after each of those messages. When I would have second-guessed myself. Maybe I'd gone too far. Maybe I should have handled it privately. Maybe I was making things worse. But not anymore. They weren't angry because I lied. They were angry because I told the truth out loud. I stepped outside that night, hoodie pulled up, hands in my pockets. The street was quiet, moonlight stretching over the pavement. I walked a few blocks to clear my head, though it didn't really need clearing anymore. Just breathing. Just space. When I came back, I passed my mailbox, then stopped. Inside was a small envelope. No return address. I opened it right there under the streetlight. Inside was a single card. On the front, to the one who finally said it. No signature. No message. Just a folded $100 bill. I didn't know who sent it. Maybe someone from the post. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe no one important at all. But the gesture said everything. We saw you. We believed you. We're rooting for you. I tucked the bill in my wallet and tossed the card. Not because it didn't matter, but because I didn't need it to matter forever. That's what healing looked like now, taking what you need and letting go of the rest. I walked back upstairs, barefoot now, lighter than I'd felt in months. No more performing. No more waiting to be seen. I was never the embarrassment. I was the evidence.